Hello and welcome to the welcome to the Aurum podcast, where we discuss all things related to building winning teams. I'm your host. My name is Tori Kuri, and I'm so glad that you could join with us today. Now, this month of May, as I promised last week, we are beginning a fresh series. Yes, we are beginning a series that is very um, pertinent to issues regarding the workplace. And this series that will begin in this month of May is called Fair Labor Practices. But before I continue, let me introduce the team here. With me, as I told you, my name is Anthony Kuri and I'm your host. And with me is the usual crew that we have. First and foremost is the MD Aurum Consultants, CHRP Zipporah Kuria. Welcome, Zippy.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, our viewers. I'm glad to be here this morning and looking forward to this conversation.
Good, thank you, Zippy. And our HR specialist, the one that we always, she's like a sounding board. Our very own, our very good friend, CHRP Martha Thuku. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you, Tony, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this podcast. Let's have an interactive discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Now, as we say, with this month of May, we are discussing issues regarding fair labor practices. And the basis of our discussing this is because the Aurum podcast is hosted by Aurum Consultants, a human resource and risk advisory consultancy. We provide HR and risk advisory, workplace risk advisory, and we are so glad that you could join with us. Now, regarding fair labor practices, as you know, we need to cultivate insights and understanding regarding ethical and compliant workplace practices. Now, in this first podcast of this series, we are discussing what constitutes labor practices. Just in brief, this is a very deep subject. In fact, the last Saturday of the year, the last Saturday, sorry, of the month, the last Saturday of May, we will on the, I presume that will be on the 27th of May, we will host a webinar where we will discuss at length the issues regarding, or we'll try to cover as many facets as possible regarding fair labor practices. So make sure you look out for that. They are aware now that will be interactive. We'll have a session where people can ask questions. They will be live. They can be able to see us. They'll be able to even ask questions and interact with the panelists. Especially if you're running a business, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're a senior executive, if you're an employee, whatever your position could be, you are you are at a place where you have questions regarding these issues. Kindly look out for that on the 27th of May. So, if Zipia could go directly and just get us rolling. What I wanted to find out, I'm sure the first thing people would want to find out, I being, representing the audience out there, want to find out what is the basis of fair labor practices. Kindly start to us off with that thought.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you for that preamble. And this is a great conversation for us to have to just discuss about this issue of labor and what really constitutes fair labor practices. And when I think about labor matters, I think one of the guiding principles, and Martha will agree with me on this, is we are guided by the labor laws, and especially in Kenya. If you go to different countries, you will find they have their own labor laws. We have the East African labor laws. We have different bodies that will govern employment relationships. If you move to the international community, you will find there is International Labour Organization, ILO. And the reason some of these organizations are in place is to help us stay in check as employers and ensure that, the practices we are having at our workplaces are fair. You have to remember, as an employer, you always have an upper hand compared to the employee who is seeking employment with you. So this relationship is a relationship that needs to be cordial. It's a relationship that needs to work. And when you're looking at fair labor practices in Kenya, I wish to say, if you're in business, if you're running a business and you have employed someone, even if it's an M-Pesa shop, some of us run, small businesses, and we think we are not bound to follow the labor laws. Even if you're running that small business, the truth is you need to be aware that you are governed by the labor laws of Kenya. And these labor laws, you will find them in the different acts that are prescribed for us, like the Employment Act of 2007. We have had quite a number of amendments, and it's important for us to be appraised with that. There are other laws as well. I always say, when you're looking at labor laws, you don't look at the act alone in isolation. You look at case laws, you look at what has been ruled over in courts, you look at your own policies, you look at the East African labor law. So you look at different documents that would help you ensure that your workplace is a fair work environment for the people you have engaged. And of course, when we are looking at these laws, they help us define the relationship and how this relationship between the employee and the employer should be governed. Because again, when that is lacking, it becomes difficult to define what brings us together and what will be the guiding principles. And of course, when you're looking at the Act of 2007, it does provide for basic terms applicable to all employment relationship or employment contracts. Because when you have engaged someone, you have basically entered into an agreement. You have basically entered into a contract. And this is irrespective of whether this agreement, you have put it in writing or whether it's verbal. Some of the conversations, Mother, we have with clients is, they wonder, why do I have to keep on giving this contract? Why can't I just have a verbal contract? And the truth is, the law actually covers the verbal contract, the non-written contracts. So you need to also be aware that if you don't have written contracts, then you leave it to the labor institutions or the government institutions to really translate to you what this relationship means. And when you're looking at the Act, it talks about the general prohibition of things like forced labor. What does forced labor mean? So you will find the Act actually, details that for you. It talks about discrimination in employment, what would constitute discrimination in employment. And these are, the basis of fair labor practices, because if you're having discrimination at the workplace, then what are we talking about? Things like sexual harassment. How do we make sure we are protecting the people we are working with? The law actually does prescribe the minimum number you need to have for you to have a policy like this, and it's important for us to understand this. Rights of employees and the obligations of the employer. Again, you will find these are things that have been put in that document so that they can be a guiding principle. We have other laws. Like in Kenya, you will find we have the WIBA Act, we have the OSHA Act, we have the Employment Relations Act, and we have many other governing acts that would help us define this relationship and how we should treat each other while at the workplace. So I don't know whether Martha, you want to add a bit on that.
Sorry, my mic was muted.
I don't know whether it's my end.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I was saying that is awesome what Zippy has presented. I wanted to add that, like when our first stop in HR would be the higher diploma in Kenya, higher diploma in Institute of HR Management. And I remember when I did that course, one of the things that we had to assign to was the code of conduct for human resource managers. And one of the things we assigned for was fair dealings. So one of the codes of ethics for HR is fair dealings. And when you look at what fair dealings is that everything you're applying for at workplace, you're applying across board. And that's why we have policies to help you base your labor practices on a policy rather than how you feel about someone or whether the other person is a relative. So in the Constitution, I think it's in the Constitution that prohibits unfair dealings, and how it puts, one of the things it puts is about discrimination. So either directly or indirectly against any person, and it actually articulates the areas that discrimination can happen, e.g. race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, diseases, such kind of things. So at the end of the day, fair labor practices is you ensure that your policy, as you are preparing it, it's covering all this to ensure that everyone is treated according to the practices and not according to how you know people, not according to the part of the country they come from. So that is what is contributes fair practices in an organization. So what are we saying? Unfair practices then will constitute that relationship of the employer relating to either promotions, demotions, and how you're handling that. So if you hold other people superior than others, then you are constituting unfair practices, and that is not good in employment. Thank you. I'm thinking my team, you guys are back. So
Yes.
So I was just describing the what constitutes in the Constitution, and really your practices in a workplace should all be equal to everyone. It looks like my team are having challenges with their internet. So as we wait for them to come in, if there's anyone who has a comment, please come in. So basis for fair labor practices is from the labor and legislation, and also the Constitution of Kenya. So my proposal would be for any employer to be able to go to these documents and find out how they are supposed to practice in their offices. And then now you can just pick up those documents, the portions of those documents, and put them in your policies so that everything is handled the same. I still having issues.
Martha, we can hear you very clearly. We can see you.
Okay. So Zippy, I have put my contribution. You can continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. I think this is an interesting conversation we are having today, and I don't know what your view is, Anthony. Maybe you can tell us from your experience these matters of fair labor practices, because sometimes they always feel like it's one-sided. I think one of the things I need to say here, without fear of contradicting myself, is that it's important to know these fair labor practices. Sometimes we project them as though that it only affects the employees, where unfairness comes. But sometimes also employers suffer unfairness where these matters of relationship is concerned. So again, I know, Mother, you are dealing with a situation where an employee just walks up to the employer and says, "I am leaving today." And your contract says you need to give a notice of a month or even 3 months. And here you come and say, "I'm leaving." So where is fairness in that angle when it comes to the employer? So again, I think even as we have this conversation, it's important even for employees who might be listening to us to realize also employers have rights. and those rights employers have a right to exercise them. So it's important for us to understand this employment relationship we have should be a very cordial relationship, should be a relationship we have both agreed to get into. And if it's not working for whatever reason, then it's important for us to just part ways instead of, getting into this situation where we are having a conflict. So again, important for us to just have that view in our minds. Back to you, Anthony.
And Zippy, before Tony comes back, and Zippy, what I can say, as far as the employer is concerned, whether the employees are not abiding, for the part of the employees, make sure that you have fulfilled what the law requires. And you have every documentation. So don't think about the employee who will not keep the end of their bargain. The most important thing that is you have a contract and you're expecting everyone to abide to that contract. Some employees will still, for one reason or the other, if you have said you give 30 days notice, they will still go. Once some even receive salary and the following day they don't turn up. But my advice, and maybe this is how I look at it, you still have to give that contract. Whether you have such kind of employees, who may not be many, you'll have just one or two bad fruits. But in all essence, the contract is binding, and for you, you should keep the end of your bargain, because anything that goes to labor court, it looks at the processes. It does not look at what has happened. So keep your documents, make sure you have your contract, make sure you have your documentation, and you're proving that you are operating in fair labor policies as prescribed by the law and also as prescribed by the Constitution. So the onus on you is to ensure that you go to the labor laws, who they're already in the internet, and you look for those clauses and make sure those clauses are in your policy, and then you check what is in the Constitution and what it says. Then you make sure your documents are complying, you are complying, and you'll be good to go, whether the employee is not abiding or not. For you, make sure you make sure you practice fair labor practices, and you will not have any issues with the law. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mother. I had muted a bit because of background noise. Indeed, as you experts have already put it across, these issues of labor practice are the practices that affect employee hiring and promotion, remuneration, disciplinary actions, things to do with termination, HR development, OSH, occupational safety and health, working conditions. All that constitutes labor practices and what we would call fair labor practices. And to your audience, our viewers and listeners, as we continue, if you have any questions, you have a comment, you're thinking, okay, you guys have defined it in a certain way. Zippy, you have said something there that probably you're an employer and you're thinking, Zippy has said something there that is very pertinent. Do I have rights? I keep hearing our clients telling us that, especially entrepreneurs and business owners. Why do we not have rights? Of course, we do have rights. But here we are talking about carrying it in a manner that is beneficial. Remember, if you remember what we did in school, if you went to college to study a bit of, even a hint of economics, any business course, you have to do factors of production. And they say it's land, labor, capital, and the entrepreneur himself, the person who organizes all these factors of production. So you, as the business owner, you as the entrepreneur, you are the one who organizes all this, and labor is part of the factor of production. And therefore, you cannot be. While it's important to know what you're supposed to do, remember you're organizing for the end benefit, being what you as the entrepreneur are envisaging to get: a profit and business growth. So fair labor practices involve you, as Martha has said, you doing your part. Now, we have discussed, we have begun the basis of fair labor practices. So Zippy, now I'll come this, and I'm sure a lot of people probably who are listening are asking us, what constitutes fair labor practices? Is to say this and that, this and that. So what constitutes fair so that we can know what is unfair? Zippy, kindly help us briefly to understand that.
Mother help, how do you explain the word fair without using the word fair? But just to respond to you, Anthony, what constitutes fair labor practices? I think when you go to the Employment Act, I think it's chapter 41, it talks about the different aspects that would constitute fairness where labor matters are concerned. And it talks about the employee, the worker, talks about the worker and the rights the worker has. And one of the rights they talk about is the right to fair remuneration. So when you're talking about fair remuneration, how do you determine fairness? And I think there's quite a number of factors you need to consider. You need to consider the kind of a job that person is supposed to be doing. You need to consider minimum wage, assuming probably that that person is at the low cadre of the employment in your organization. You need to consider things like qualifications, other employees who are working within an organization. You need to ensure there is no feeling of unfairness. And this is where you will find, as an HR, then you need to be strategic and you need to think through this. You probably need to put in place job groups. You need to put in place a salary structure and a policy, that governs remuneration. We've seen situations where an employer is remunerating employees, and because there is no documentation that would guide, it's actually dependent on how that employee pleads their case, or is dependent on how the boss feels about this employee. Maybe it's a friend or a relative or a friend of a friend. And I think it's important for us to ensure when where this area is concerned, there's fairness and how we are remunerating people. There's no feeling of some people get remunerated better than others, and the law actually provides for that. The other thing it talks about, and again, when you look at the OSHA Act, you will find it's extensively covered. But the Employment Act, again, the same chapter, it talks about reasonable working conditions. And what does this entail? It needs to be a place where, at least it's clean. There's space for people to sit. People are not working, they're supposed to be working on a computer, but they're working standing. It needs to be a place where, the ergonomics are well taken care of. There is, the quality of air, noise. All these are things that, should be considered. What kind of an environment do we have as a workplace? Again, that the labor laws talk about that. The other thing, it talks about that constitutes a fair labor practice is where you find an employee wants to probably participate or join a trade union or any association of that like. Sometimes as employers, we are not very open to some of these things, but the law again protects employee and it says it's their right. When you look at the Constitution allows for a right of association. So what does that mean? Of course, you need to make sure you have policy guidelines that will help people, live within boundaries. But you cannot tell someone you can't join this association because you're an employee of this organization, because the law provides for that. There are many other areas of, fairness when it comes to matters labor. How you handle employee relation matters, How are we handling things like, for example, disciplinary cases, Is there one person who has done a gross misconduct, we fire them in the morning, another one does the same mistake and they get away with it? Is there fairness in the way we are practicing this? When you're looking at the same, again, you also look at employers' rights, and one of the rights is a right of association. Again, employers have a right to join employers' organizations like FKE. While employees have a right to join the trade union, employers have a right to join FKE, which I'm not so sure whether it's a trade union for employers, but of course it's a body that also supports employers in that nature. They also have an opportunity to participate in activities or programs, of the employer organization. So assuming FKE is doing several, trainings or programs that would help them, become better employers, then again they have a right to participate in some of these activities. So I think when we are talking about fair labor practices, I think one of the things that comes to my mind is what would be the best practice when it comes to handling people, when it comes to managing people. You have brought people to the organization, even before we go to the labor, because I think the labor laws probably were introduced and probably many years when we were not even here in this world, because there was a feeling of serious unfairness and people being pushed to the corner. I remember when, we were just thinking about getting into this profession, we were looking backwards and we were seeing people used to have what they used to call the personnel manager, and it used to be personnel management where it used to be, uh, dictatorship, serious dictatorship is higher fire, we used to use these methods of leadership, mbwa, management by walking around, and it used to be bad, it really used to be bad because HR is now that it's starting to get that, glimpse of, what the workplace should be like. Is this time now they're starting, to come out like a partner to businesses. But for the longest, they've been seen like, the enemy to the employees. So it's very important for us when you're looking at fair labor practices to also look at what are the best practices. How would I want to be treated? If I was on the receiving end of this employee, is this the same way I would expect to be treated? So again, just have that at the back of your mind, even as you're dealing with people, because people are not a means to an end. They are not robots. They are not, objects. There are people who have been entrusted to you, and you've been given these people to be able to mentor and to be able to help them grow even as they serve your customers. So again, just going back to, what is fairness really? Should the labor laws be the only guide for us to bring fairness at the workplace? And I think that's a question every employer should be able to answer. Sometimes we feel we are giving a lot, and it can't feel like that. With all fairness, it can't feel like as an employer, I'm always giving, and these people are not appreciating. But again, ask yourself, are you giving your best? Are you being fair in every dealing you're having with your people? Because like we always say, you are a steward in whatever business you're running, and you shall be answerable to God with what you did with that business and the people God entrusted you to. So back to you, Martha.
Yeah, you made me laugh. I remembered a friend of mine. So we were sharing, and so she told us that one day a staff came to the office at the MD. MD has told me to come and see you. So she was wondering, you see me for what? So this organization had taken HR as that personnel department that hires and fires. So once you are told to go to HR means you're going to be sacked. So this lady had not worked in such an organization. So she's wondering, if you go back to your office, I'll find out where you came. And so she goes to the MD, and the MD said, what are you doing? When I send someone to your office, you're supposed to give them a sacking letter. It was so funny that used to happen. And that could be many years, because in all my HR practice, I've not come across that. So that is really unfair. And I think we have evolved from that. And we are treating people as people. So back to our question, with the meaning of fair labor practices, and what we discussed before is any minimum that has been prescribed in the law and in the Constitution, and those are the things that you need to pick from the law and the Constitution and put them in your human resource manual. All I can say is for every practice in HR, it's so important that you have a policy, including salary, because people will always feel unfairly treated if you are feeling you're doing the same work, but this person is earning more than you. You need to have a basis of your salary. And so when you have policies which you are training people more often, you have a HR manual that constitutes all these things that are supposed to be there from the labor laws, then people are aware of your practices, and they are not going to feel like you're practicing unfairly. The other thing is, when you're any practice that relates, or something ongoing at work, anything that you are doing, the various acts as an employer that you do in the office, need to be fair. What I say fair is that it's like, you are a parent and you have all these children. Let none of them feel like they are more liked than the other. When you practice something like someone is feeling more superior than the others, then you'll find that there will be a lot of insubordination. There's going to be a lot of hostility, especially if one employee feels more elated than the other. So that's why you need to have fair dealings, and policy helps you make decisions. Meaning, should you have policies in employment, policies in salary, any area of HR, even if you have employed a relative, you will not feel obliged to hold them. You will apply policy at every area, meaning that hakuna mapendeleo in Kiswahili. You are practicing what you are doing for A is what you are doing for B, and that's what you are doing for C. So that's what really fair labor practices are. Their basis is from the labor laws and from Constitution, and then you practice them evenly in the organization. And some of those things are the ones that Zippy mentioned, like rights to protection, right to a good environment, right, all those rights to even engaging in a union, because it is there in the law. In fact, like that one is even in international labor laws. So make sure you know all the applicable laws, and then put those ones in your policy, and then practice them. So it's one thing to have them in a book, and it's the other to practice them. The way your mindset then needs to be changed. If you're the kind of person who prefers others than the others, your mindset really needs to be changed, so that you are going by the book, so that you are not accused of unfair labor from whatever it is, unfair labor practices that could happen because of your mindset. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Martha. Indeed, I appreciate the fact that we are able to look at this aspect very clearly, very well, and see where exactly do we fall. And Martha, the way you're saying that somebody was sent to you, they walked in, you had no idea why they were sent to you, you had no idea where they came from, and they went back to the MD, and the MD is like, "What do you mean? This person is supposed to get a termination letter." This week, Zippy and I were discussing the other day. We were having a word, and we were discussing, and I think we're discussing with a mutual friend, and she works for an organization that is American. It's a US-based organization. And for them, because she's a Kenyan, she works for these Americans. They have a branch in Kenya and across Africa. She was telling Zippy and I, the idea of just sending people home from the US perspective is very simple. Kazi Meisha, this end of this month, please take a hike. And Zippy was telling her, what? Do not go that direction. If it's a Kenyan employee under Kenyan employment law, you better tell your friends, those that are asking you to send people home, that the Kenyan labor law has a bit of a protocol, which if you don't follow, you can start crying. So yeah, so it's true. Probably your boss might have worked in America, in the United States, and that is why they were wondering, Apani, quickly, you're fired, get going. Your stories are finished. So, having said that, then Zippy, the question comes in as we come to a close. What constitutes, how do you define an unfair labor practice?
Thank you, Anthony. Now I'm just listening to what you're saying, And I realized that so many times, I hear that comment, we are firing now, and you're not even wanting to give people the benefit out. You're not thinking through it. You're not thinking through the consequences of what you're just about to do. Yeah, so sorry, I thought there was a bit of background noise. So sometimes it's important to just think through what you're about to do and the effects it has. Remember, I've said before we even talk about fair labor practices, let's think about what is the best practice. Even from a human perspective, how we treating this scenario. I always say in the HR department, there's no day that is the same like the other day. You will find every day you're dealing with different scenarios. The scenario you dealt with today, it will come tomorrow twisted 10 times in a totally different way. And I think as an HR, you must have a lot of wisdom to know how to handle these situations. Otherwise, you will find yourself in a situation where you're being very unfair on how you're handling employees. And I think when we talk about unfair labor practices, it's the complete opposite of what you're talking about. And like I've said, the law is very clear. When you look at the labor laws, Section 41 of the Employment Act, and I touch a bit on this, it provides for some of these areas of fairness. It provides for fair hearing when you're dealing with employees an issue of indiscipline. It provides for fair hearing. I think before we never used to have this clearly defined, but now it's there. And that's why you will hear when someone has been terminated and they have gone to court and they've come back and they're suing you for, unfair termination or unprocedural. What happens? They go back to that section and see, did you follow procedure? When you look at the Constitution of Kenya, Article 41, 1 of 2010, it also provides for the right of the employee, interestingly, in our constitution. And it talks about fair labor practices. So again, we need to be alert, we need to be aware, and we need to understand the law actually protects the employee. Sometimes we act like we are not aware, we don't know. And I remember one time I was talking to a labor commissioner, and I said, sometimes I feel like the labor office does not do much enough to educate the employer. And his response actually left me shocked because he said, you know what, it's your responsibility as an employer. When you're starting a business, do your research, understand what the law says, understand the constitution, understand the different statutes of the law and that touches on what you're about to do and what actually they mean for you. And that tells you actually the onus comes back to you as an employer. When you're looking again at the Employment Act, Section 45.2, it talks about unfair termination and what could constitute the same. So there's the unfair termination in terms of how you do need to deal with the issues of indiscipline, and there's the element of what actually constitutes an unfair termination. And you will find a lot of times where you find unfair labor practices touch a lot with employees, terminations and separation. So we need to just be a little bit aware on what are the expectations of the law and how should we handle these situations. I've touched a bit on the other areas like remuneration. When you are paying people differently for the same kind of work they are doing, and I've had those kind of organizations, and I'm sure both of you have this experience where you're doing the same job with someone else, but they earn 3 times your salary. Probably this person, you have even taught them the job, and you're left wondering, why is it that they're earning way more than I am? And that is an unfair labor practice because it's in the open, it's not, no one is lying about it, but it's right there for you to see. And what happens as an employer, I end up feeling aggrieved. So again, there's a lot of areas that we might find ourselves being unfair. But I think the biggest of all is really where you're dealing with employees and you're having to exit employees. How fair are you in that process? I have a friend who said, sometimes you can also work in a way that you allow an employee to fire themselves, to sack themselves. And there are many ways you can actually do that. Sometimes, of course, there's a need depending on the gravity of the issue where you have to end up in a way of terminating. But there are other ways, actually. Sometimes you allow someone to put themselves in a box. You have forgiven them so many times, and they keep on doing the same mistakes, and they put themselves in a situation where they are having to say, what, I think I'm actually the one who's on the wrong here. So again, to just understand some of these dynamics, I think is critical for you as an employer. Back to you, Martha.
Yeah, Zipi, yeah. So that's really true. So in short, what Zippy is saying is that for unfair labor practices, it relates to things or the acts in your organization that you're doing that violate the right of protection of employees. As far as the labor laws are concerned and the Constitution. So what we said is that you need to familiarize yourself with what the law says, because then everything starts and ends there. And then now you build on that and ensure that there is a policy. The most important thing is that where you feel like you'll be inadequate, or some of the CEO feel HR things are tiresome and they don't want to learn. It's good to engage a HR consultant like Oram. We'll be able to help you with this and interpret the laws for you. You can also even get a labor lawyer who you can be consulting here and there, and maybe even get yourself registered with Federation of Kenya Employers. So the most important thing is that you are ensuring that any practices you're doing, they are really not unfair as far as the law and Constitution is concerned. For the employer, the documentation is very important. Whether there are labor issues or not, make sure you have that documentation of everything that you do. And overall speaking, you need to have policies in every area. You need to have a policy in recruitment that you follow to the book. You need to have a policy in remuneration, a policy in performance management, a policy even in employee welfare. So don't expect that we know. Even a policy in orientation. When you engage someone, don't think that you have engaged them, they know the job, you put them in the field, they start working. There needs to be a policy of how you induct them into the organization so that they can gel in properly. So the employee seems like the lesser person here, and so that's why the labor court will talk for the employee, because you are superior as an employer. So make sure that what you are practicing will not one day end you up in court, because the problem with Kenyans currently, they are very, very informed of their rights. Initially, it was not there, but currently, even house helps, they are very informed of their rights. And should you do some of these things, they are likely to have you be put to account. And when you are there being put into account, please ensure that you have your own backup. You have been dealing fairly, because these are human beings. So even as we talk about the law, you also need to practice things that when you go home and sleep, your conscience is very clear. Unless you have killed your conscience that you can do things just like that and then you can still go sleep. You need to practice in a way that when you go to bed, that thing is not disturbing you. So at the end of the day, it is your conscience, it's your relationship with your maker, and this is the maker you pray to increase your organization. So you also need to give him a basis of why he should increase your organization, why your organization should not fall. So consider all those things, and then the human part also consider it, and make sure that your unfair labor practices change to fair labor practices, and you'll find your organization thriving. Thank you very much. Back to Tony.
Wow. Today we are hearing stuff, guys. We are hearing wonderful, beautiful things. In fact, can you imagine, ladies? 3/4 of an hour has passed, and we have barely scratched the surface. Indeed, as Martha said, this is a conversation that can only get deeper, better, more interesting. As Martha said, and even Zippy has said, some of these things Beyond just knowing and downloading and putting them on a piece of paper, it's very important for you as an employer to also seek external help, whether it is through FKE, Federation of Kenya Employers, and such like organizations. Also get in touch with specialists like Aurum consultants, where we can be able to help you specifically to get yourself not just avoid issues, but get the very best for your employees in terms of productivity and output. And that begins with carrying out optimum labor practices. As I said, we will having this conversation this month. We'll keep talking regarding labor practices, what constitutes fair practices, what constitutes unfair practices, consequences for doing the wrong thing, having the wrong, unfair labor practice. What are the consequences that could hit you? These are conversations we'll be having this month as we talk about labor practice, and it will be very practical. We'll try and bring, entrepreneurs who will speak from their perspective what happens when the practice is easy. Here you're hearing the experts talk. So what does it mean when an entrepreneur comes here and says, "Okay, you guys are talking a lot of theory," like Martha's former boss, who sent somebody to be fired, chap chap. We will bring somebody who will hope to bring individuals who will tell us they attempted that and what happened. Having said that, we've come to the end of our podcast. As you can see, we have our contacts at the bottom of your screen, whether telephone, whether social media connections, email, our website, our telephone, our LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook connections. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you have insights, if you have objections, bring them in. We would love to handle them, whether live or even when we are not live. When we see questions that come after we are finished, we always attempt to bring them up in the following podcast or even on our social media handles. Having said that, Martha, thank you very much. Zippy, thank you for the insight that you've brought. To you, our viewer and listener, thank you for taking your time this Saturday morning to come. Next week, we'll continue with this conversation regarding fair labor practices. We'll try and look at what is the other end of the spectrum when it comes to unfair practices. What are they, and what are the consequences of indulging in such? Having said that, thank you for your time. And even to our technical team behind the scenes, thank you for keeping us on air. Have a great weekend and God bless you. Thank you.